Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining us audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what a rubber stamp parliament is, or a rubber stamp Congress. What it effectively means is decisions are made elsewhere, the real decisions, the big decisions, or most of the decisions are made elsewhere, and the parliament just goes, we'll give that a veneer of legitimacy. We'll give those decisions a veneer of legitimacy by voting and saying that we'll unanimously support this or that policy or position, or new law or new legislation, whatever it might be. Now, there was a time when parliaments were sovereign, particularly in modern history, and that's of course now changed. The globalist cabal is in charge. And all the big decisions, whether it be about trade policy, energy policy, migration policy, how elections are to be run and administered, transport policy, everything, is being decided now by the globalists. Health policy and local parliaments and congresses all across the West are just required now to give legitimacy to those globalist cabal decisions, so to legitimize the illegitimate. So this means that local parliaments, as in local national parliaments, British Parliament, the American, US Congress, the Australian Parliament, and so on, don't make those big decisions anymore that they once did. And increasingly, the only decision, as a local council, the only decision you get to make is how many lesbian painting classes you can have in the town. Things like that, symbolic ones, micro social engineering type policies. Even then, those would be handed down in terms of from the globes cabal, and you will create social division. So you will create social division by multiplying the number of lesbian painting classes. Take money away from worthwhile causes and put it into symbolic social engineering type causes, that sort of thing. So all those big decisions are made elsewhere, and local parliaments were once sovereign. The British Parliament, as an example, now don't get to make any of those big decisions. In fact, they're reduced to really being just pretend parliaments that, I don't know. So you'd call them rubber stamp parliaments in the true sense of the word. I'll draw a parallel between, say, in ancient Rome, that the Senate used to make the decisions, and there were, a fairly elite group of the bigger landowners and the bigger stakeholders in society, and they had this somewhat democratic system, but it was robust in many ways and held up quite well for hundreds of years, and then started to fall apart with the era of the generalissimo that you saw with Marius and Sulla and Julius Caesar and so on. So when the Principate came, when the emperor was the first emperor Augustus came in, the role of the Senate was drastically changed from what it had been. The Senate no longer made the big decisions. The big decisions were made by the emperor and the advisors around the emperor, but the Senate really was there to do nothing but be where people could pose and make their rather pointless speeches, but they had very little legislative power. And if you read, say, Tacitus, the Annals of Imperial Rome, as a case in point, and even Suetonius and Plutarch and so on, when you look at the decisions that the emperors or the Senate rather was making, then they were down to trivial things like legislating and debating the behaviour of visiting dancing troupes into Italy. That sort of stuff, and crazy stuff. Would the dancers of the dancing troupe reveal some or part of their anatomy and how much, and down to levels of ridiculous trivia would be what they were debating. Now, there were times when the emperor didn't want to too closely associate with a new piece of legislation that may reflect badly on the emperor or may not be popular. So they would demand that the Senate go through this pretend debate and pretend discussion and pretend committees, and then would come out with a policy that was directly what they were instructed to do and to implement. So they would add a veneer again, a veneer of legitimacy to the decisions already made by the emperor. But the Senate had no authority to make any decisions. Only decisions that the emperor had regarded as just too small and trivial for the emperor and his advisors to worry about. Only those decisions were left to the Senate, and they would debate them furiously because they were so irrelevant to anything, and they would pretend they were wrestling with major problems of state and issues of state, when in reality they were just debating bullshit. The same is, of course, in the West today, that the big decisions are, of course, made by the globalists, and everything else is just window dressing and hot air and these ridiculous Senate review committees where the Senate supposedly reviews the heads of various departments, Department of Energy, Department of Education, Department whatever, and all these people are just globalist stooge flunkies. That they don't make any decision. They're just doing what they've been told to by the globalist cabal, and the senators are. There's so few independent senators asking independent questions, and there's so few consequences for the globalist stooges that come in front of the Senate that are many of them telling the most blatant and grotesque lies and untruths. There's no consequences for them. They're not being charged or pursued by the Department of Justice or fired or anything like that. So, and just to illustrate, I've used this example before, but just to illustrate the extent, there are some very big issues that the globalists want implemented that are passed through the Australian parliaments just on a nod. There's no debate, there's no discussion, there's fuck all. And the drafting of these laws, it's the same laws, with micro changes in relation to the different terrains or climates or something, but it's effectively the same legislation in the US, it is in France, in Germany, in Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. It's the globalist, the globalist legislation. You will do this, and there's no debate. It just goes through on a nod. They don't need to debate, nor would they want to. This is what the globalists want, and your job is to do what the globalists fucking tell you to fucking do. You two-bit little flunkies. So this is, Western governments are just fetch and carry flunkies for the globalists. But every now and again, something comes up that the globalists say, nah, we don't care about that. Do what you want with it. And then you'll see the most vigorous, far-reaching debaters. All these politicians, they're let off the leash. And they're actually allowed to pretend that they are representatives of the people again, which, of course, they're not. But they're allowed to pretend it just this once, just on this one issue. And so there was one about off the coast of part of Australia about the size of fishing nets. Again, I mentioned this previously, whether the gaps in the fishing net would be, this is for sort of small to medium scale trawler fishing, whether the gaps in the net would be, 20 centimetres wide or 30 centimetres or 15 centimetres, but the width in the net, the mesh of the fishing nets. Now, you'd think that would be too small for anyone. You think you'd give that to some little committee and say, just take care of that. But instead, the whole parliament is convulsed with vigorous and excited debate and animated debate as politicians get up and pretend they're dealing with meaty issues of international significance, life and death issues. But instead, they're debating the gap in a fishing net. And the debate rages on for days, and the legislation proposed, and it's amended. Then there's amendments to the amendment. There's more debate. The politicians are denouncing each other, spitting into microphones and getting into an absolute lather over this fucking irrelevant issue. Whereas, the momentous issues going through that are going to cause a doubling in the price of energy, or a doubling in the cost of rent in the next 12 months. Those things, no debate at all. Nothing to talk about. just go straight through on a nod, and you wouldn't even know that the legislation changed. The globalist controlled media barely mention it. It's buried on some little editorial piece on page, fucking 20 or something, and this sort of thing. Whereas the fishing debate, the gaps in the fishing net, that's taking up a lot of column inches. I mean, how exciting is it? They're talking about the gap in the fishing net. I mean, this is huge. This is this is incredibly big. The fact that you're going to be paying 5 times as much for your energy in a few years' time, who gives a fuck? The globalists have decided that. It's not our decision, so we don't want to talk about it. And that's really where we're at today. And so I see the arrival of the emperors, or the principate, as it was called in ancient Rome, and the huge reduction in the power of the Senate to make any decisions other than irrelevant ones the emperor didn't care about. I see it's the same today as the globalists making all the big decisions, and Western parliaments being nothing but rubber stamps and a little bunch of fetch and carry flunkies working for the globalists. Given waterfront mansions in reward, though. You've been a Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.